Tatsujuno, or as it's known in the West, Truxton II, is the Toaplan game that got away. It was released only in arcades and for the Japanese computer, the FM Towns, though at the time of this recording, a Switch port is supposedly in the works. It's vibrant, colorful, has an amazing soundtrack, and no! It's really freaking difficult. If you're familiar with its predecessor, Truxton, you're most likely familiar with the Genesis or Mega Drive port. If you thought that game was hard, then you're in for a swift ass-whooping in Truxton II. Now, I may not be the best shoot-'em-up player who's ever lived, but I've beaten my fair share of tough old-school shoot-'em-ups. But Tatsujuno is on another level. There's a reason they called it Master again, because you really need to be the best of the best if you want to see this game through to the end, even if you're credit feeding. Now, an issue that a lot of shoot-'em-ups, such as Darius Gaiden, suffer from, at least in the eyes of the casual player, is that they're really short if you go through them just credit feeding. Tatsujuno tries to fix this problem by creating checkpoints, similar to games from other genres like Castlevania. So, if your ship gets destroyed, rather than just respawning and continuing forward, you instead have to restart at a checkpoint. However, unlike a game like R-Type, the developers aren't so skimpy on the checkpoints. For the most part, they're frequent enough that you only need to get beyond a 30-second or so challenge in order to reach the next checkpoint. Unfortunately, every time you die in Tatsujuno, your ship gets reset to base stats, so no matter how many weapon power-ups you got, you're going back to the basics when you die. But in my opinion, the real challenge is that your ship's speed is also taken away from you, so you're not only underpowered, but you move like a snail, and it only takes a single mistake to get sent back to this state. Is it frustrating? Yeah, it is, but it's not as bad as it could have been. Getting up to maximum weapon output isn't all that tricky this time around. Now in the original Truxton, once you had collected 5 P icons, your firepower would increase 1 level. But in Tatsujuno, you only need to collect the colored weapon icons in order to power up your ship, and collecting a second one of the same color will upgrade your firepower. Not only that, but each time one drops, it cycles through all 3 colors several times before leaving the screen. Our ship also has a front-facing red shot, so no matter what weapon you use, you can always hit what's in front of you, which occasionally could be difficult in the first game when you were using the blue lightning attack. The 3 classic RGB color attacks are back, but they work completely different now. Red has gone from being a shotgun blast to an all-around explosion shot. It can be useful for hitting enemies behind and beside you. The blue shot still functions in a similar way, but it only ever has 2 beams coming out. You may think this is a bit of a downgrade from Truxton, but having the red laser shooting in front of you really makes this a more useful weapon in my opinion. This is the one I tend to stick to most while playing. And then the green shot has become a shotgun-like attack, though it's much wider when coming out of your ship, so you can't quite point blank with it like you could with the red shot in the first game. This one was easily my least favorite of the group. At least in Truxton, even though the green shot was hard to hit stuff with, it still packed a punch. Here, I just couldn't get behind it. The power-ups overall feel like 1 step forward and 1 step back from the first game. I really can't decide if I like it more or less than in the original Truxton. But even with an easier to upgrade ship, it's still really damn hard. The biggest problem is the size of your ship's hitbox. If you're a fan of newer shoot-'em-ups, you may be used to having a teeny tiny little square hitbox in the very center of your ship. That's not how Tatsujuno works. If a bullet so much as grazes your ship, it's over. Now, this isn't inherently a problem. There are plenty of games that work great with this system, such as Lancer or even Toaplan's own Fire Shark, but it just doesn't quite work here in Tatsujuno. The bullet patterns enemies fire at you are just a bit too close together and fast to be able to dodge consistently. Yeah, with enough practice you can totally master this game, but it all just boils down to memorizing exactly where you need to go in order to not get hit, rather than trying to react to get out of the way. It means if you mess up or get out of position, it can be incredibly difficult to recover. Sure, there are bombs that can help you get out of a quick jam, but they feel more like a cheap solution to a more central problem. Unfortunately, the difficulty curve of Tatsujin no is a bit out of whack too. For the most part, the end bosses of each level are really fun, difficult, and challenging. They all have unique patterns that are tough to recognize at first and still pose a challenge even once you do know how to dodge them. That is, with the exception of the very first boss. His attack patterns are all over the place. He shoots several widespread shots as well as homing attacks, in addition to firing lasers out the front. He's an enormous first roadblock for first-time players. He's probably the most difficult boss in the first 4 or so stages, and the fact that he's the first one that you have to fight makes him all the more frustrating. In fact, the whole first stage is way harder than I expected, and I think it's even harder than some of the ones that come later on, or at the very least, just as difficult. For this reason, Tatsujin no really feels like an arcade game, and not in a good way. The fact that the game is so hard at the beginning and calms down a bit afterwards makes it feel like it was designed solely to make money off of first-time players by starting off incredibly difficult in an attempt to draw out more quarters. The first game had a much more gradual difficulty, starting off a little tough, but easy enough that most players familiar with the shoot-'em-up gameplay could most likely get to the first boss without losing a continue on their first try. Then, as the game went along, it slowly got more and more difficult. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I did not beat this game. In fact, I pretty much gave up on the arcade version because it was just too frustrating. The footage you've been seeing has actually been from the FM Towns version of this game, and there's a reason for that. The arcade game is unrelenting in its difficulty, and the game was definitely built with the limitations of the hardware in mind. On the FM Towns, however, the game isn't quite as optimized, resulting in some serious slowdown here and there, which, in my opinion, is a godsend. It makes some of the more hectic parts, and in particular that first boss battle, much easier since you're given just slightly more time to react to enemy bullets. In addition to slowdown, the FM Towns version also has an easy mode you can select from in the options menu. From what I can tell, it just makes some enemies go down quicker, which makes the game just a tad easier. Other than that, I had a hard time seeing the difference between normal and easy, but always found myself doing a bit better when I played on easy mode. There is a trade-off though. The original arcade version ran in a vertical orientation, and since the FM Towns was a home computer system, it wasn't feasible to run the game that way. The original Truxton had the same issue when going to console, but on Sega's console port, they shrank things down a bit and gave the player a status screen to the right in order to maintain the proper aspect ratio. But here on the FM Towns, they just cut the top fifth of the screen off in order to keep sprites the same size. This would be fine, except that the enemies still spawn where they do in the arcade version, meaning that some of the enemies will fire at you before they're even on screen, and you often have less time to react than you would on the arcade. Honestly, I didn't find this to get in the way that much, but I know it'll turn some people away. Tatsujin no also has a 2-player mode, although it feels rather tacked on. I really liked that checkpoints were so frequent in the single-player mode, making it so that even if you were credit feeding, you still had to use skill to get past certain parts and really know what you're doing, but in 2-player mode, as long as the other player's alive, you can easily just respawn, essentially rendering the checkpoints null and void unless you're actually trying to go for a 1cc or aren't credit feeding. It takes the stress out of losing a ship because the penalty is much less harsh in 2-player. I know, 2-player is often an afterthought in shoot-'em-ups, but I was still a little disappointed to see how it was handled here. I feel like making the players rely on picking up items to respawn their co-pilot would have been a much better implementation of 2-player. This is how it works in R-Type DX. Players share lives, but as long as a player picks up a power-up or speed item, they can respawn their friend without any penalties. The only way you lose a life is if both of you die, and then you get sent back to a checkpoint. This would have made for a much more interesting and dynamic 2-player mode for Tatsujin no, but it was an earlier example of a 2-player shoot-'em-up, so I guess I should keep my expectations in check. Overall, I don't think Tatsujin no is a bad game. If you can get beyond the first stage and get into the groove, it can be really fun, but the difficulty really does hold it back from being more approachable. I can really only recommend it to big fans of Toaplan and or old school shoot 'em ups. If you're looking for something more casual or with a lower barrier of entry that's from the 90s, I always recommend Darius Gaiden, and it's also got a 2-player mode. Thanks for watching. I'm Bofner, and I'll see you all next time! You can tell when I think a game is frustratingly difficult by the file names I give it when I finish recording. Bro, calm down.